In 1984, a research team in a Norwegian valley aimed a red laser at a flashing light. It changed from one flash to two, then returned to one when the laser was lowered. The team recorded 8 reactions in 9 attempts. People in the valley had reported strange lights for years. Some hung above the hills, others moved slowly near the ground. No one knew whether they were seeing weather, aircraft, or something else. The researchers brought cameras, radar, a magnetic meter, and a Geiger counter. They wanted to replace stories with measurements. That effort leads through a 16th century woodcut, a cowboy's campfire that left no ashes, and wartime pilots whose radar screens stayed empty while bright lights paced their aircraft. It also leads to a ball of light captured by scientific cameras. The history of strange lights is not one story with one answer. It is a long record of people trying to identify what they saw and of a few cases that remain open. Stone Age people watched meteors, lightning, and the colored glow of the northern lights. Some researchers think wavy cave marks might show an aurora, but that is only an interpretation. There is also a Chinese story about a woman named Fu Pao who saw a strong light moving around a star and lighting the ground. The story is part of legend, not a record we can date with confidence. The first written sources we can examine are more practical. Babylonian scribes recorded unusual events in the sky as omens. In the 4th century BC, Aristotle described 2 bright spots beside the sun. They seemed to rise with it and follow it until sunset. Those extra suns are known today as sundogs. Ice crystals high in the atmosphere bend sunlight and create bright patches on either side of the real sun. The event was genuine. The explanation came much later. On April 14, 1561, people in Nuremberg, Germany, saw a complicated dawn display. A printer named Hans Glaser produced a broadsheet about it. The woodcut shows red arcs, globes, crosses, long rods, and a dark spear above the city. The text says the shapes moved and fought for more than an hour before falling beyond the walls in smoke. It ends by telling readers to repent and remember that God alone knows what such signs mean. The woodcut still exists in a Zurich library. Later writers called it a space battle, but it is one printed report made for people who paid for news and moral instruction. Atmospheric optics offer another possible reading. A halo around the sun can create arcs, pillars, and bright shapes that look like separate objects. A similar broadsheet from Basel 5 years later described dark spheres near the sun. We cannot prove exactly what Nuremberg saw. We only know how the event was presented, as an image tied to a religious warning. That pattern would return many times. The setting would change, but the question would stay the same. Was the light a sign, or was it a physical object? In 1883, a young cattle worker named Robert Reed Ellison was driving cattle through Paisano Pass in West Texas. He saw a flickering light and assumed it was an Apache campfire. Other settlers later said they had seen a similar light in the area. When people went out to investigate, they found no ashes and no camp. The country around Paisano Pass is open and rough. At night, a single light on the ground can look close even when it is far away. But a campfire should leave some trace, and this one apparently did not. This is usually called the First Marfa Report, but it is a family story. Ellison did not write it himself. The first magazine version appeared in 1957. The lights still attract visitors to a viewing area about 9 miles east of Marfa. They can appear to split, fade, or move across the horizon. The leading modern explanation is that many sightings are distant headlights, distorted by layers of warm and cool air over the desert. That explanation fits nights after roads and cars existed. It does not automatically settle the earliest story. Similar reports appeared elsewhere. A 1922 Brown Mountain survey found trains, cars, and brush fires. At Paulding, Michigan, students traced the light to distant headlights. In Queensland, Jack Pettigrew recreated a Min-Min-like glow with truck headlights and an inverted mirage. These demonstrations explain how a light can look detached from its source. They do not prove that every report had the same cause. The important change came at the end of the 19th century, when American newspapers began publishing stories about mystery airships. The lights were no longer described only as fires or omens. They were being described as machines. Once people expected a machine, they began looking for evidence that could detect one. The next observers had more than their eyes. They had radar. By late 1944, the night war over Europe depended on radar. A radar set in a fighter was meant to show another aircraft even when the pilot could not see it. A bomber, a balloon, or a jet should leave a mark on the scope. American crews from the 415th Night Fighter Squadron were flying Bristol Beaufighters from the Dijon area in France. The aircraft carried a pilot and a radar operator. Their job was to find targets in the dark. Then the crews began reporting lights that radar could not find. They described orange or white lights, sometimes in a line, moving beside the aircraft. The lights seemed to pace the fighters and then disappear. The crew could see them, but the airborne radar showed nothing. Ground controllers often saw nothing as well. Fred Ringwald, the squadron's intelligence officer, collected reports of 14 incidents. On December 13, 1944, Allied headquarters in Paris issued a press note about the sightings. Newspapers presented the lights as a possible German weapon. The war was full of secret technology, so a new weapon seemed possible. But former German air officers described no matching program. The British Air Ministry suggested rockets, jet fighters, or electrical effects for some cases, and left the rest unresolved. The lights still needed a name. They got one from a cartoon. On November 27, 1944, radar operator Donald Myers returned from a flight upset by what he had seen. In his pocket was a comic strip called Smoky Stover, about a foolish fireman. The strip used the nonsense word "foo" again and again. Myers put the comic on a desk and called the lights Foo Fighters. The phrase spread through the squadron and into newspapers. Time magazine used it in January 19, 1945, but the name did not explain the lights. The crews never reported being attacked. They said the lights were difficult to approach and impossible to shake. After the war, a government science panel listed several possible causes: St. Elmo's fire, electrical fields, and reflections from ice crystals. None was confirmed as the single answer. 4 years later, a different kind of light began appearing over the American Southwest. It was green, bright, and sometimes close to sensitive military sites. One reported Foo Fighter incident took place north of Strasbourg in November 19, 1944. Edward Schluter was flying the Beaufighter. Donald Myers was watching the radar. Ringwald was also on board. The crew saw 8 to 10 bright orange lights off the left wing. They turned toward the lights. The objects vanished. Later, the crew saw them again farther away. Neither the aircraft radar nor the ground station showed a matching target. The account came from trained observers, but no radar recording survives. Their testimony cannot identify the cause. In December 19, 1948, 2 aircraft crews over New Mexico reported a green ball of light. Astronomer Lincoln La Paz investigated the events and plotted their paths. He searched for fragments, a crater, or a trail of dust. He found none and argued that the objects were not ordinary meteorites. The sightings continued near places such as Los Alamos. The Air Force began Project Twinkle, which was supposed to photograph the lights. The camera network was never completed. Many astronomers still interpret at least some green fireballs as unusually bright meteors or bolides. La Paz did not accept that explanation for the events he studied. The disagreement survived because there was no complete film record and no recovered material that could settle it. The lights later appeared over Lubbock, Texas, and Washington, D.C. Each new report added witnesses and newspaper coverage, but not necessarily a better measurement. Pilots could misjudge distance or speed. Radar could miss a faint or unusual light. The reports remained difficult to test. Researchers eventually tried a different approach. Instead of waiting for a light to appear over a military base, they went to a place where the lights were reported almost every week. That place was Hessdalen, Norway. Hessdalen is a small valley in central Norway. From late 1981 through 1984, residents reported lights above the hills and near the ground. They described white, yellow, and sometimes orange objects. Some seemed to hang in one place. Others moved slowly along the valley. At the peak, residents reported roughly 20 lights a week, bringing researchers to the valley. Erling Strand was an engineer. He did not begin with a belief in flying saucers. He wanted measurements. In the summer of 1983, he helped organize Project Hessdalen. From the 21st of January to February 26, 1984, the team worked in the cold with radar, cameras, a magnetic meter, a Geiger counter, and a small red laser. They recorded 53 observations that they could not confidently identify as houses, cars, aircraft, or other known sources. The most unusual event happened on the 12th of February at about 7:35 in the evening. A flashing light moved slowly north through the valley. Kurt Persson watched it through binoculars while Strand aimed the laser at it. Persson could not see the laser beam itself. When the beam was switched on, the light changed from a single flash to a double flash. The team switched the laser off. The light returned to a single flash. They repeated the test several times. Later that evening, another light moved south, and they tried again. Across both events, they recorded 8 reactions in 9 attempts. This is one of the strongest pieces of the Hessdalen record because it describes a controlled action followed by a change in the light. But it still has limits. No independent team has repeated the test, and the light's distance was uncertain. The change may have been connected to the laser, or it may have been a coincidence. The instruments also produced mixed results. Some lights appeared to match radar returns. Others did not. The project report notes that noise could explain some radar recordings. The Geiger counter found no unusual radiation, but the lights did not come close enough for that result to settle much. In the winter of 1985, researchers returned with more equipment and saw no lights while the instruments were running. Residents later said the lights had not stopped. The results showed how hard it was to have instruments ready at the right moment. An automatic station was installed in 1998. Cameras continued watching after the sightings became less frequent, falling to roughly 20 reports a year. The valley still produces observations, but no accepted explanation has closed the case. Theories include plasma, unusual electrical effects, and lights created by geology or atmospheric conditions. These ideas may explain some events. None has been demonstrated as the cause of all the reports. Unlike earlier cases, Hessdalen produced instrument readings as well as memories. The results narrowed the questions. The next step was to identify a strange light while it was actually happening. That happened during a completely ordinary search for lightning. In July 2012, a team on the Qinghai Plateau in China was using cameras to study lightning. They were not looking for an unexplained object. A bolt struck about 900 meters away, roughly 10 football fields. A glowing ball appeared in the camera frame and moved slowly for just over 1.5 seconds. The light changed color from purple-white to orange and then red. Jianyong, CEN, Ping Yuan, and Simin Shui captured its spectrum, which is the pattern of colors that reveals what the light contains. The spectrum showed silicon, iron, and calcium. Those elements are common in soil. The result supports a model in which lightning strikes the ground, throws hot mineral material into the air, and creates a glowing ball for a short time. This was the first strong spectral record of natural ball lightning. It does not explain every glowing object, but it proves that one remarkable kind is natural. Other reports are linked to earthquakes. Earthquake lights have been described as flashes, glowing sheets, or balls near the time of a tremor. Video from Sichuan in 2008 is often shown as an example. The United States Geological Survey says experts do not agree on how many earthquake light reports are genuine. Power lines arcing during a quake can create similar flashes. Then there was the Phoenix Lights case. On March 13, 1997, thousands of people in Arizona looked up. Early in the evening, witnesses described a wide V-shaped group of lights. Later, at about 10 o'clock, another row appeared to hang in the sky and then drop behind a mountain. The later row has a documented explanation. Maryland Air National Guard A-10s released parachute flares over the Barry Goldwater Range. A pilot confirmed the flight. The flares appeared to hover as they dropped behind a ridge. The earlier V-shaped sighting is more difficult. Witness accounts vary, and there is no single recording that settles what moved over the city. The case is often treated as one event, but the later flares and the earlier lights may not have been the same thing. These examples show why the history remains complicated. A strange light can be identified when the timing, location, and measurements line up. The Qinghai ball left a spectrum. The Phoenix flares left a flight record. Other cases have only testimony or an empty radar screen. That does not make every unexplained light extraordinary. It means the evidence is uneven. The record gives us solid answers. Sundogs are ice crystals. Many desert lights are distorted headlights. The Qinghai event was natural ball lightning. The later Phoenix lights were flares. Hessdalen is still open. The earliest Marfa story is still disputed. Foo Fighters have no single official explanation. The green fireballs remain a disagreement between a meteor reading and La Paz's analysis. The useful question is not whether every light has been explained. It is whether the evidence became stronger when people stopped turning a sighting into a story and started recording the event itself. Sometimes the answer is yes. Sometimes the light disappears before the instruments are ready. Strange lights have been treated as omens, weapons, aircraft, and visitors. Some were ice in the air, headlights on a road, flares, meteors, or burning soil. Others remain uncertain because the evidence is too thin to identify them. The best records do not promise a dramatic answer. They show exactly what was seen, what was measured, and what still needs testing. That is why the sky remains interesting. Not every light is a mystery, but every mystery needs better evidence.